Welcome to Ghost Lore Chronicles, the place where forgotten legends, haunted places, and chilling mysteries come alive. Tonight, we journey deep into the shadows of America's darkest tales, where abandoned places still breathe and voices of the past refuse to be silenced. Turn down the lights, open your mind, and prepare yourself for a story that will haunt you long after the video ends. My name is Alex. I live in the city of Chicago. The city is big, modern, and full of life. Yet, in its dark corners, secrets are always hiding. And I've always been drawn to the strange. Urban legends, ghost stories, tales of abandoned places. I first heard about an old amusement park in West Virginia through a friend. One that had been shut down for decades. The story goes that at night, the rides move on their own. They say the sound of children's laughter drifts through the empty park, even though no child is anywhere near it. First, I thought it was just a rumor, but the more I tried to ignore it, the more it crawled into my mind. Every night when I was alone, I swore I could almost hear that laughter echoing in my ears. I made a decision. I was going there. With my camera, my recorder, and a notebook, I would document everything. My plan was to spend one night in that park and uncover the truth. I left Chicago and drove for hours down long, winding roads. The sky was heavy with clouds. A crisp autumn wind pressed against the car. After endless driving, I finally pulled up to the rusted gates, and a sudden weight pressed down on my chest. The old sign above the gate swung weakly in the breeze. The paint was flaked off, the letters almost gone, but it was still clear. This was the infamous amusement park. The moment I stepped inside, the air changed. There was a strange smell. Rust, damp wood, and something faintly sweet, like the ghost of cotton candy long since rotted away. It was as if the laughter and life of the crowds were trapped here, replaced now by the smell of death and abandonment. I made my way toward the roller coaster. The tracks were jagged with rust, blood red in the fading light. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. A single cart was rolling forward, slowly. Even though there was no electricity, no power running through the park. My hands shook as I pulled out my recorder and hit the button. My voice trembled as I spoke. I'm looking at it now. There's no power, and yet the cart is moving. That was when I heard another sound, drifting from deeper inside the park. The carousel. The wooden horses were turning in slow circles and faintly, so faintly it almost hurt to hear. It was playing carnival music. A warped, broken tune, carried on the wind. And then, I heard it. Children's laughter. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Bright, playful, like kids chasing each other, but with something cold underneath. Something that didn't belong in the world of the living. I froze. My heart hammered against my throat. No one was there. No one at all. But I knew with absolute certainty, I was not alone. I parked where the cracked asphalt still remembered the weight of cars and tour buses. There was a brittle hush around the place, the kind that makes every small sound howl. Pebbles under my boots, the faint creak of a sign swaying. I pulled my coat tight and reminded myself why I do this. Curiosity, stubbornness, the belief that most legends are half true and the other half is evidence waiting to be found. Before I went in, I tried to learn what I could. I had spent the week leading up to this driving through Chicago neighborhoods, talking to people who had driven past the turnoff 100 times and to others who remembered it from summers long gone. I sat in the public library for an afternoon leafing through brittle newspapers and zoning reports. The library's local history section smelled like old glue and dust. The librarian, a woman named Marjorie with a voice like weathered parchment, brought me clippings she had saved. Closed in '79, she said, tapping a yellowed page. Accident in '78, then more trouble. Lawsuits. People started calling it cursed after that. Kids dared each other to go in. That's when the stories grew. She folded her hands as if closing a book on it. You know, sometimes it's the stories that keep a place alive longer than people. An old groundskeeper's name kept surfacing, Tom Evers. I found him at a diner just off the interstate, a man whose skin had been baked by decades of sun. Tom wouldn't meet my eyes at first. When he did, His expression was the kind that has seen amusement park parades and funerals alike. "They shut it down fast," he told me between bites of toast. "After that accident, kids were injured. People blamed the owners. They said the roller coaster snapped a cable. I was there the week after. Smell of burnt rubber and hot metal. You could hear the echoes for years after the crowds left. Hell, sometimes I thought I heard laughing when I'd be alone fixing fences." "Laughing?" I asked. He shrugged. "Could be the wind. Could be guilt. Folks around here like to pin a name on the things that scare them." The interviews left me with more questions than answers, and that was fine. I like questions. They give the story room to breathe. But I also knew that any real evidence would have to come from inside the park. So I walked through the gate. The ticket booth still stood like a small, dead animal. Hand-lettered signs peeled from plywood. A faded poster showed children with perfect hair and unreal smiles, the slogan promising a summer of wonder. I brushed past the cotton candy concession, now a wooden skeleton. The path opened to a pocket of the park where the carousel boomed and the roller coaster loomed like a sleeping titan. Everything looked abandoned and staged, like a set left mid-performance. I switched on the camera. Light from the moon was weak, but the recorder's red dot blinked insistently. I moved slowly, narrating into the microphone not out of necessity but because the cadence steadied me. My breath sounded too loud. The cassette of the carousel's music, whatever mechanism made that warped melody, played on and then stuttered to silence. The wooden horses faced empty stands, eyes painted wide. One of them had a crack down its flank like a scar. I was about 30 feet from the coaster when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick ones. A sprinting thud that stopped as suddenly as it began. I turned. There was only a scattering of autumn leaves. My chest thudded. I told myself it was an animal, a raccoon maybe, but the hair on the back of my neck had a mind of its own. I kept moving, heart trying to be rational while the rest of me readied for something irrational. A two-seater swing hung suspended, moving faintly, though there was no breeze. My reflection in the glass of a broken ride booth looked like someone else's, hollow-eyed and too still. I crouched to inspect the ground and found a footprint that didn't belong to me. It was small, child-sized, pressed into the damp dirt like a memory. Beside it, something else. A strip of yellowed ribbon, twined and old, with faded carnival print flowers. I put it in my pocket without thinking. As I walked deeper, the sounds layered. Sometimes I heard the distant rumble of the city, an interstate, a horn, and sometimes there was nothing but that impossible carnival music, like a phonograph skipping over a hymn. My recorder caught whispers I couldn't make out properly. Later, when I listened back, they would unspool into syllables that might have been words. At the time, all I could do was keep moving and try to make sense of the physical world. I found the midway booths grouped together like teeth. One booth still had a rusted row of stuffed prizes, their stitched smiles sagging. Someone had scribbled a message on the prize table with spray paint. Stay. The letters were almost swallowed by time, but they were there. A warning left by someone who had left in a hurry or someone who wanted to keep others out. At the edge of the funhouse, I discovered a collection of small things laid out like an altar. A paper cup with a sticky red interior, a cracked plastic whistle, and a Polaroid photo curled at the edges. I knelt and wiped the dust from the photo. It showed a group of children in front of the carousel, their faces frozen in a fashion model grin. Someone had scratched a single word into the photo's margin. Remember, single objects gathered like talismans can change the tone of a place. The whistle felt warm, as if someone had blown it recently. The photo felt heavier than paper. I took pictures, my hands steady now with a purpose that had nothing to do with courage. You collect small, strange things and the story grows arms and legs. The first truly unnatural thing happened near the tunnel under the coaster. My flashlight cut a cone of light through the dark. The beam landed on a set of tiny shoe prints scuffed in a pattern that suggested running. They ran toward the tunnel and then stopped as if the runner had teleported. I could trace them only up to the mouth, where the dirt was disturbed in an odd, circular way. I stepped toward the tunnel and felt like I had crossed a temperature line. The air inside seemed colder, and my breath came out in visible puffs. My recorder picked up something faint and fast. A chorus of shallow gasps, like many small lungs filling at once. The hairs on my arms rose, and a smell, iron and something floral, lifted like a curtain. That smell matched the ribbon in my pocket, and for a second my mind wanted to make everything neat. A carnival, a game, a child's lost ribbon. Then something brushed my shoulder. It was the lightest touch, barely there, like a moth, and yet it hit me with the force of a hand. I turned instantly, swinging the flashlight, but there was nothing. The beam found only plastered insects and spiderwebs. My voice, which I had tried to keep civilized, cracked and I laughed, a thin, helpless sound. "You're not funny," I told the empty air. The laugh that answered me belonged to a child, but it wasn't a laugh I knew. It was layered, like a chorus in a room with many mirrors. Close, but also distance bent. It made my bones feel fragile. I pressed the recorder to my lips and whispered questions that felt ridiculous even as I asked them. "Who are you? What do you want?" The answer etched itself not in words but in a sensation. The unmistakable impression of being watched, followed by the faint tug of a child's hand slipping into mine and then pulling away. I spun around and there was nothing but the path and that single set of small prints leading away into the dark. I followed them because I always follow where the evidence leads. They took me to a cluster of abandoned carnival trailers, their painted slogans flaking. One trailer door gaped open. Inside, a dusty row of movie posters hung like flags. I stepped in and the door closed with a soft click behind me. The air was dead still. My flashlight jittered across rows of metal chairs and a long, low screen streaked with mildew. In the center of the floor lay a child's toy, a wind-up music box, its ballerina missing one arm, its key rusted solid. I wound it anyway. For a second there was nothing, and then with a musical hiccup, a warped and slow melody filled the trailer. It sounded like the same music from the carousel, but stretched thin and wrong. The light from my flashlight quivered. The recorder clicked on its own. The red light, which I'd left blinking, pulsed faster. In the doorway behind me, the tiny shoe prints stopped. The smell grew stronger. Copper and lilies. Something moved in the corner of my eye. I turned to face it and saw the silhouette of a child. Not a full figure, more the impression of one made by fog. Tilted its head, as if listening. And then, because my mouth had decided I should speak, I asked its name. The missed child answered by humming the music box's tune. A thin, single line that matched the warped melody exactly. It sounded almost like agreement. Then, just as my skin went cold with dread and fascination mixed together, the silhouette dissolved and the trailer door slowly opened again, letting in a slice of moonlight. The small prints led out into the same path I had come in on, but now they were joined by another kind of track. Not shoe prints, but the faint smear of something that could have been paint or blood. I couldn't tell. I stepped out, the adrenaline smashing better judgment into a pounding rhythm. I had recorded everything. I had photos. The evidence was messy, and that was the point. Places like this don't offer neat unveilings. They leak, they hint, they keep you off balance. I felt like a person on a cliff edge who'd leaned too far to see what was down below. I walked back toward the carousel, the ribbon in my pocket a dull, pressing thing. The laughter was everywhere again now, not teasing but closer, circling. I raised my voice and called out, "What happened here? Who were you?" For an answer I didn't expect, the carousel stopped mid-turn. The music froze on a single, discordant note and then vanished. The wooden horse nearest me tilted its head, paint flaking like dried skin. From somewhere below the boardwalk, something rang. A bell, small and crystalline. Then the ride began to move again, not by the gentle mechanical rhythm but in short, jerking spasms, as if remembering motion after a long sleep. I felt that night settle into me, like water into cloth. I knew two things with the kind of certainty that doesn't need proof. The park remembered, and whatever haunted it was not done telling its story. By the time I reached the far edge of the park, I was no longer walking with the same steady rhythm I had at the beginning. My stride had shortened. Every step felt like stepping into a story someone else had written. The paths curled into themselves, looping like a dream. I marked my route with chalk on the boards of concession stands. But sometimes when I turned around, the marks seemed fainter, as if the wood had swallowed them. The Ferris wheel dominated the skyline, a great rusted crown with its seats hanging like pendulums. Up close, it was worse. Steel bones pitted and scarred, a nest of vines curling around its supports. I shone my light on the seats, one by one. In the third from the bottom, a shape sat still. For an instant, my mind said mannequin, some leftover prop. The kind of thing urban explorers leave behind as a joke. But the figure's head turned slightly, just enough to betray the truth of presence. I blinked, and the seat was empty. I told myself I would not climb the Ferris wheel. I told myself I wasn't here to tempt gravity. But the recorder's red light blinked in rhythm with my own pulse, and I wanted to know. So I put one foot on the lowest rung. The ladder groaned. Halfway up, the wind rose, even though the trees below were still. By the time I reached the midpoint, I could see the whole park below me, sprawled like a carcass. The midway, the carousel, the roller coaster's broken ribs. All silent. From above came the sound of chains tightening. My flashlight beam caught the wheel's axle shuddering, dust raining down. The seats swayed, and then the whole wheel lurched once, a violent shiver, though there was no power feeding it. The seat nearest me moved, slowly, back and forth like something breathing. I descended faster than I had climbed, boots slipping. When I hit the ground, I didn't look back. The wheel was still, its shadow stretching long and thin, but the impression of movement clung to me. Deeper in the park, near the old maintenance sheds, I found graffiti scrawled in layers. Kids had left their marks here, initials, taunts, warnings. But beneath the spray paint, carved into the wood itself, was something older. A phrase etched again and again. Let them play. The words repeated until the wood was scarred deep. My hand hovered above them, and the boards felt faintly warm, as if the carving had been fresh. I pushed into one of the sheds. The smell was thick oil, mildew, iron. Inside, shelves leaned under the weight of tools and spare parts. And then there were the toys. A row of dolls, their porcelain faces cracked, arranged neatly on a workbench. Each one had its eyes blacked out with ink or paint. At the feet of the dolls lay more ribbons, dozens of them, tangled together like weeds pulled from the ground. When I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the shed's only window. My face was pale, sweat slick, but behind me, in the glass, not the room, stood the shape of children, more than one, a crowd of them. They were watching me, their mouths moving in silence. I spun around. Empty room. The reflection lingered half a second longer before fading, as if the glass remembered better than the air. I stumbled back outside, gulping the night. The sounds returned, whispers, footsteps in the gravel that weren't mine. I followed them toward the roller coaster. This track rose in a jagged silhouette, loops broken, supports bowing. At its base, the entry gate still stood, chains dangling. A sign hung crookedly, its painted letters barely legible. Thrill of a lifetime. I stepped through. The platform groaned under my weight. I ran my hand along the safety bar of the first car. It was slick, damp, though it hadn't rained. When I leaned closer, I saw the dampness was a dark stain. My stomach tightened, and then I heard the laughter again. Louder this time. Not one child, many. A chorus, rising and falling like a tide. It circled the coaster, filling the air above me. The cars rattled. Slowly, impossibly, the first cart in the line shifted forward an inch. Then another. Metal squealed. The chain lift groaned to life with no power to feed it. I stepped back, my recorder capturing every sound. My flashlight trembled across the wooden boards. As the cart climbed the track, the laughter peaked. Not joyous, shrill, ragged, desperate. The sound of something trapped in play forever. Halfway up, the cart stopped, balanced on the incline. And then, as if pushed by invisible hands, it raced back down toward me. I dove clear. Wood splintered. The cart slammed into the barrier at the end of the line. a crash that echoed across the whole park. When the dust settled, the laughter had stopped. Only silence. The kind of silence that feels earned. Like something waiting for you to speak first. I didn't run, though every instinct screamed at me to leave. Instead, I picked myself up from the dirt, brushing splinters from my jacket, and forced myself to keep recording. My voice shook as I spoke into the device. I just saw the roller coaster cart move without power. It nearly hit me. If anyone listens to this, something is alive in here. Something's playing with me. The word playing lodged in my throat, because that's what it felt like. A game. Cruel one. The path deeper into the park was lined with game stalls, ring toss, milk bottle pyramids, shooting galleries. Their paint had peeled to raw wood. Stuffed animals turned to rot and dust. My flashlight passed over glass bottles that stood in perfect rows. I froze. Every bottle had something inside. Not milk, not prizes, but scraps of paper. Dozens of them. Pulled one out. The paper was damp, discolored, but I could still make out the writing. Childish handwriting. Letters backward. It read, "I don't want to play anymore." Another slip said, "It hurts when they laugh." The farther I looked, the worse the notes became. Please, drawings of stick figures with wide black mouths. Words like forever scrawled until the page tore. I left the stall, stomach tight, and heard the faintest sound of clapping. 3 slow claps, as if someone had just watched me finish a performance. The clapping stopped. Ahead, the food court spread out, tables broken, umbrellas collapsed. A popcorn machine stood cracked open, its glass shattered. I leaned in with my light and froze. The machine wasn't empty. Inside, resting in a bed of old kernels, was a human jawbone. I staggered back, nearly dropping the flashlight. Something rustled the tables. A child's giggle right behind me. I spun, beam flashing over empty benches, but the sound darted away, circling, always just out of reach. And then a new sound joined it. A faint calliope tune, grinding and warping like it was being played underwater. I followed it, against reason, toward the carousel. The horses were frozen now, no longer turning. Their painted eyes were chipped, manes streaked with mold. Yet the music played, and as I stepped closer, I saw the mirrors on the carousel's center column. In the glass, children's faces appeared. Not one, not 2 dozens. Pale, smeared with dirt, some grinning too wide, others expressionless. They pressed their hands to the glass, fogging it. And in the reflection, I saw myself standing among them. But when I turned, I was alone. My breath came ragged. I whispered into the recorder, "They're here. I don't see them with my eyes, but they're here. They're trying to pull me in, like I'm supposed to be part of their game." The music cut off, sudden and sharp. The silence pressed heavy. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then died. I hit it against my palm, desperate, but it stayed dark. And in that darkness, the voices rose. Not just laughter anymore. Whispers, chants, my name. Alex. 100 voices, layered together, calling from every corner of the park. Alex, play with us. My knees went weak. I stumbled toward the path, fumbling for the backup flashlight in my pack. The whispers followed, echoing, growing louder. And when the new light finally clicked on, it shone across the ground in front of me. Tiny footprints, dozens of them, leading deeper into the dark. The footprints led me like a breadcrumb trail into the park's guts, slipping between collapsed stalls and under a sagging banner. My new flashlight painted the world in a narrow cone, and the world felt smaller for it, tighter, as if the park itself were drawing a curtain around me. Every now and then the beam would catch something that made my stomach twist. A child's shoe tread half buried in moss, a paper cup with a lip still crusted in sticky syrup, a crayon drawing pinned to a rotten post that depicted a house with too many windows and dark dots where the people should be. I should have gone back. I should have driven straight to the diner and told Tom what I'd seen, told Marjorie to pull more clippings, told myself to stop being a magnet for bad ideas. But there's this other thing in me, the reporter, the curious fool, who believes that if you stop when a place asks you to stop, you let the place keep its secret. So I kept walking, The line of prints curved toward the funhouse. The paint on the sign had sloughed off enough to reveal the underlying wood, and the word funhouse looked like a grin. The doors hung heavy on one hinge. As I pushed inside, the temperature dropped so quickly my breath fogged in front of my face. The air smelled like wet paint and a memory of soap. Inside, mirrors leaned against warped boards at odd angles. They reflected me a dozen times, each reflection slightly different. An extra shadow here, a broader set of eyes there. In one mirror, I thought I saw a smudge that looked eerily like a small handprint on my shoulder. But when I spun, nothing was there. The floor sloped in little, deceptive ways. I had to remind myself to trust the light. Along the funhouse's corridor, someone had taped newspaper clippings to the wall. I recognized the headlines. Accident at fairgrounds, families sue for negligence, park closes after tragedy. Tucked among those yellowed articles was a torn page from a ledger, the park operator's log. My flashlight haloed the script. Names, dates, terse notes. Ride inspected. Okay. Cable replaced. Complaint filed. Then, near the bottom, a line written in a different hand, hurried and slanted. They didn't notify the parents. 8 missing. Underneath, the ink had been smeared, as if someone had tried to wipe the words away but only made them bleed into the paper. I ran my thumb over the ledger and the paper rasped like a throat. My chest hurt. 8 missing. 8 small things that once ran and laughed and now were numbers. The idea looped in my head until the funhouse's warped glass seemed to hold faces in its depths. Faces that wanted to be noticed. A laugh, singular and very near, broke the moment. It sounded like someone had pressed a bell inside a child's throat. "Alex!" it called, and I felt my name hit the walls and ricochet back. The voice was playfully accusing, as if I'd cheated at hide and seek. "Who's there?" called loud, too loud. My words felt clumsy in that narrow hall of mirrors. Silence answered, then the faint shuffle of small feet. The footsteps came from the tilt-a-whirl room and stopped just inside the doorway. In the doorway lay a blanket of dust and a small, round fabric ball, faded stripes still visible. My light found it and made the dust glitter like frost. The ball rolled toward me on its own, not pushed but drawn, as if by a child's invisible hand. I picked it up. It was warm. A memory, not mine at the time, flashed through me. Tom leaning over his coffee, the diner's fluorescent light humming. "After the accident," he'd said once, voice low, "people swore you could hear the park at night. Not ghosts, they'd say. Memories. But memories can be sticky." He had tapped the table. "Sometimes they hold on to what they loved best." The ball thudded against my palm and my hands remembered being small. For a moment I felt absurdly, painfully tender, like the kind of ache you get when you watch children at a playground and know someday their hair will silver. Then something else tugged at the edges of that tenderness, an underlying undercurrent that made my teeth ache. The tug was insistence, a pressure from the dark that felt like a mouth closing. My recorder scrubbed with a scratch, a microsecond of static that had a cadence to it, almost like syllables, before the device resumed normal sound. I made a noise that might have been a laugh and stepped over a threshold into a larger chamber. The funhouse opened up into what had once been the staging area, a place for jugglers and clowns, now only a ring of overturned chairs and a broken trunk of costumes. In the center sat an old, battered puppet theater, its painted curtain moth-eaten. On the stage lay a row of shoes, little ones, lined up as if for inspection. The leftmost pair had their laces still tied and threaded with a faded ribbon identical to the one I'd found earlier. My heart bumping in my throat, I moved closer until my face was inches from them. Written on the soles of the shoes in what looked like penciled handwriting were names. I made myself read them aloud. Asterisk Daniel. Rosie. Tommy. Asterisk my voice stopped. The last name had been scrawled twice, frantic and overlapped. A sound like wind, sharp, small, passed through the theater. The puppet curtain fluttered as if someone had taken a breath backstage. And then, very softly, the stage voice started. "Play with us," it said. In a chorus so tiny and unanimous, I could not tell where one voice ended and another began. The tone was pleading and eager, like children begging for another turn. But threaded through the pleading was a hardness that undercut it, a sense that refusal was not an option. I felt the air press against my chest like hands. I backed away, but my feet snagged on something. When I looked down there, a single footprint had appeared in the dust, small, powdered, leading toward the stage. I felt foolish, my skepticism peeling like old wallpaper. Yet my fingers moved without my permission, reaching toward the recorder in my pocket to make sure it was still recording. The red light blinked. The battery indicator on my camera flashed a low, angry symbol. My phone, my lifeline, had drained to less than 10%. Panic is a funny thing. It sharpens things and blunts others all at once. I told myself stories about dead batteries and old electronics. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation for everything. Wind, settling timbers, my mind playing tricks after hours of being alone. But the recordings would later show that when the voices pressed, the battery died at the worst possible second. The light vanished, then flared weakly, as if the park let it. The room hiccuped into darkness. When the emergency beam from my backup flashlight flicked on, the puppet curtain had moved. The shoes were gone from the stage. The small footprints continued across the floor in a neat, childish line, leading up the stairs that opened into the heart of the park. Beyond the archway, through the broken window panes, I saw them. Not full-bodied, never that, but the suggestion of motion. A flicker at the Ferris wheel, a smear on the broken boards of the roller coaster, a series of little shadows skipping across the carousel's platform. They were calling again, softer now, like a lullaby. I found I was answering without thinking. "I'm coming," I whispered, and the word tasted like a lie. I took the ribbon from my pocket. It felt heavier than before, saturated with cold. I tied it to my wrist, an absurd talisman. Around me the park exhaled. The creak of a hinge, the distant ping of a bell, the hush of a crowd that had never left. My recorder, stubborn, continued its dim red pulse. Somewhere in the dark, an unseen child clapped once. I stepped out of the funhouse and into the path. The footprints led on. The footprints did not relent. They pulled me past the midway and toward a section of the park I hadn't yet explored. The back service road where the staff once parked trailers and maintenance vehicles. Old light poles leaned like tired soldiers. The air smelled of damp earth and something metallic that made me think of hospital trays and pennies. My flashlight cut a path through the dark and landed on a door set into the side of a concrete service building. A hand-painted sign hung crooked above it. Staff only. The prints led straight to that door. My hand trembled as I turned the rusted handle. It gave with a groan and a rattle, opening onto a corridor that smelled of oil and bleach. Fluorescent bulbs, long dead, dangled like dropped teeth. I stepped inside, the beam of light scanning lockers caked with dust and a row of steel cabinets. Someone had left paperwork pinned to a corkboard, a map of the park with colored pins, and a smudged list of names at the edge. Asterisk maintenance. Tom Evers. Operators J. Quinn. Asterisk below that, in a different hand and hurried, night shift log, 6/12/78. The date hit me like wet wood. I hunted for the log. Files crammed into cabinets. Calendars faded into pale ghosts. Near the back, beneath a stack of invoices, I found a battered binder labeled Park Operations. The pages inside were brittle but legible. Shift notes, incident reports, routine checks. Most entries were mundane. Grease replaced, light bulb swapped, funnel cake order. But then I found the pages that changed everything. A cluster of reports from June of 1978. The language started clinical and then frayed. Asterisk at approximately 3:15 p.m. Cable on lift 2 snapped. Riders ejected from car 4. Injuries reported. Local ambulance notified. Asterisk the pages listed names, children, volunteers, then the line that made me fold the paper into myself. Asterisk unaccounted for, 8 minors. Search inconclusive. Park closed pending investigation. Asterisk the ink beside it, someone's marginal scrawl, read, "Do not speak of containment. Containment." My mouth tasted of dust. The word carried a bureaucratic chill, the kind used to hide things from public light. I turned the page and found sketches, rough diagrams of a maintenance pit beneath the roller coaster, notes about an access hatch, a scrawled entry that looked less like handwriting and more like a carving. They keep playing where the gears meet the dark. I felt the edges of sanity thin. The park, this place of cotton candy and laughter, had mechanical guts where no child should ever be. The idea felt obscene and precise at once. I pushed the binder closed and stashed it in my bag. Whoever had written those words had been trying to explain something impossible with plain office language. Containment. Gears meet the dark. The combination made my skin crawl. Footsteps scuffed outside, single, small, then a scatter, as if several children were scrambling. My heart pounded against my ribs. I wasn't going to be set like bait. I kept moving, following the maintenance corridor until it opened into a courtyard behind the coaster. Moonlight slashed across twisted metal, and there it was. A steel hatch, bolted and flanked by warning signs that had long since faded into toothless suggestions. The hatch's rim was stained dark. A padlock dangled from the latch, broken and left to rot. Someone had pried it open long ago. The breeze that rose from the opening smelled like iron and tuberose, the same floral metallic smell that had been trailing me all night. My recorder's red light blinked in my pocket like a heartbeat. I pried the hatch up. Cold air spilled out, smelling of old oil and something else. Something sweet and rotten. A ladder descended into a space that the moon could not touch. I shone my light down the shaft. The ladder vanished into darkness. At the bottom, the beam found a floor slick with the same dark stain I'd seen at the coaster platform. Tiny shoe prints ringed the hatch like a child's circle game. I should have left the hatch alone. I should have walked away and burned the binder or handed it to someone who would keep it from prying hands. Instead, I climbed down. The ladder was slick with grime. Each rung shook under my weight, bringing air that tasted of metal and old candy. At the bottom, the flashlight revealed a maintenance gallery. A narrow catwalk nestled between massive gears, pulleys, and oil-slicked chain drives. Platforms ran like veins, crossing under the roller coaster's belly. The smell intensified, and a soft, persistent sound thrummed beneath everything. An old gear wheel's memory, or perhaps something awake and slow. My light picked out a trip line of toys strung 3 feet from the ground, dolls' heads, plastic animals, a knotted rope of ribbons. Someone had built a boundary, festooned toys meant to mark a space. Below them, in a shallow pool of pooled oil, something lay half-submerged. A small, mud-caked sneaker. Its laces untied, a single name scrawled on its sole in what looked like pencil. Tommy. Tommy? I said aloud, my voice small in the metallic hollow. The word echoed and returned split into many parts, as if the pipes themselves had a mouth. From the darkness, something touched my ankle. It was not much, maybe a fingertip to a shank of denim, but it carried with it the sensation of a small, cold hand and a weight of pleading. I looked down. Nothing. My light picked out only the sneaker, the pool, and the trail of toys. The thrumming beneath my feet sped up like an engine warming, but there was no motor, only the sound of something remembering the rhythm of play. I followed the catwalk. The deeper I went, the more the place felt less like a machine room and more like a secret playground welded beneath the park's bones. Little chairs were arranged in a ring, their legs stuck into the grease as if someone had left them mid-tea party. A rusted merry-go-round, far smaller than the one above, sat idle at the center. Its platform was scratched with tiny initials. I wiped one away with the sleeve of my jacket and found a name underneath, carved into the metal. Rosie. My breath came faster. The ledger's entries stitched back into the present. 8 missing, containment, gears that met the dark. It was not metaphor. It was literal. The machinery and the shadows had become a place where children could be taken and kept playing in a private world below the park. A voice, soft as breath, bright as a bell, said my name from somewhere very near but not visible. Alex, it whispered, closer than the touch on my ankle had been. Play. The plea was layered with want and command. It left no room for negotiation. I told myself to climb back up, I told myself this was the time to be smart, to be frightened enough to run. My boots dragged. My hands trembled on the railing. Yet something else pulled. A compulsion like a child tugging when you are about to turn away. Maybe it was empathy, maybe morbid curiosity. Maybe the night had braided itself into me. A smear of movement uncurled at the edge of my light. A small figure darted past, so quick my brain registered it as a blink. It headed toward a small alcove where a child-sized door lay half ajar. Beyond the door, a cavity opened into a space lit by a pale, otherworldly glow. It looked nothing like a maintenance room. Inside were small beds, toys neatly arranged, walls covered in crayon murals of blue skies and smiling suns. The contrast between the mechanical rust and that tender domesticity should have repulsed me. Instead, it felt like stumbling into the back room of a theater where the performers still waited. I reached for the doorway and the figure turned, just for a fraction. I saw a face rimed in shadow, young, eyes like discs of pooled moonlight. It smiled, and the smile was too wide for anything alive. "Come play," it said, but the voice behind those lips was layered with many others. "We have made it warm." A surge of adrenaline slammed into my chest. The rational part of me cataloged the psychic manipulation, sounds, smells, childlike comforts, as the park's way of ensnaring adults who cared too much. Yet the immediate, animal response was an aching empathy that muted my disgust. Small things wanting care. I took one step in. The alcove smelled of sugar and lilac. The beds were tiny, and each had been tucked with a care that made my throat clench. On one small pillow lay a Polaroid. I picked it up with fingers that suddenly felt foreign. The image was a snapshot of the very space I stood in now, taken at an earlier time. Laughing children on the beds, ribbons in their hair, the carousel visible through the doorway above. On the back, written in a scrawl that trembled with age and something like apology, were the words, *, they never woke up. We kept them safe. *. The words hit me like a fist. Something behind me exhaled, and when I turned, the catwalk was full children standing shoulder to shoulder. Not fully formed, edges blurred like chalk in rain. Their eyes fixed on me. One of them raised a hand and pointed at the Polaroid in my palm. "You found us," it said. The voice had no cruelty now, only a sad, childish certainty. "You saw how it happened. You will tell." "No," I said, but my voice was small, and their faces did not change. A pressure built in the air like someone squeezing a sponge until water ran. The gears somewhere below began to move with more insistence, and the lights, those thin, eerie bulbs, flickered, bathing the faces in a stuttering glow. The children sang then, soft and precise, a round of a nursery rhyme I could not place. My chest caved. For a moment I understood it all with an awful clarity. The park had been built on an old quarry, on earth that swallowed things down and kept them. When the accident happened, something in the dark had reached up and taken children. Maybe 8, maybe more, and the operators, terrified and guilty, had tried to hide what had occurred. But hiding seed is not containment. The children had been kept where the gears were quiet, where play was eternal because time itself seemed to lag. The operator's words, *, do not speak of containment *, were less an instruction than a prayer to let sleeping things sleep. The little hands reached for me again, and this time I did not resist with my whole body. I felt fingers ghost my sleeve. Not malicious, more like a request. One small hand slipped into mine, its touch colder than the night but not entirely frightening. It felt like accepting the hand of someone who had waited too long for a promise. "Tell them," the child said, meaning I should tell the world what I had seen. I realized then that the recorder in my pocket might be the only thing that could speak when I couldn't. I fumbled for it with one hand while the other remained wrapped in that tiny palm. My thumb hit the red light. The device was alive. My voice came out in a ragged whisper as I pressed the record function to my lips and began to speak, describing the alcove, the names, the shoes, the Polaroid. The children's faces leaned in, sincere as confessions. When I finished, the grip on my hand loosened. The small hand pulled away and retreated into the crowd like a tide slipping back. The figures merged with the shadows and sank through cracks in the metal, back to where the gears met the dark. I climbed the ladder out of the hatch with the binder heavy in my backpack and the Polaroid taped to my chest like a proof against disbelief. When I hauled myself back into the courtyard, dawn hinted on the horizon. Thin and silver, the park seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting to see whether I would wake up and forget what I'd witnessed. I walked to my car in a fog of exhaustion and adrenaline. I sat behind the wheel and for a long time did nothing but hold the steering wheel as if it were the only thing tethering me to the waking world. The binder, the names, the Polaroid, the children's hands, they were all there, real and humiliating and impossible. The recorder in my pocket blinked its slow red heartbeat. I started the engine and drove back to Chicago as the sky went paler. In the rearview mirror, the park shrank until it was a smudge of iron and vine. I told myself I would go straight to the library, straight to Marjorie, straight to Tom if he would listen. The story lived in my bag like a thing that would not be quiet. I didn't sleep that day. Sleep felt like a betrayal. I sat under the harsh reading lamp of my kitchen table and spread the binder and the Polaroid and the notes out like evidence at a coroner's table. The recorder's tapes sat in the player, and when I hit play, the night replayed itself in small, surgical pieces. The warped melody, the whispering chorus, the slap of the coaster, the soft, pleading voices below the tracks. My hands trembled as I annotated margins and circled names. The words from the ledger, "Do not speak of containment," seemed to pulse every time I looked at them. Marjorie answered on the second ring when I called the library. Her voice softened when I told her I had something to show. "Come by after closing," she said. "Bring whatever you have. Don't tell anyone else if you can help it." The way she said it made me think she had always been waiting for this, like a librarian who knows the right page will turn. Tom was harder. He met me at the diner, but he held his coffee cup like a man who wanted to dissolve into lukewarm liquid. When I set the binder between us and pushed the Polaroid forward, his hands shook. "I should have said something," he muttered, and the words were small. "You do what you have to when you're scared. We all did." He stared at the photo for a long time, then looked up at me. "You found the maintenance area?" I told him everything, watching the way his jaw worked. He cursed softly, the kind of growl that has shape because it's been chewed on for years. "They buried a lot of things," he said. "Sometimes you bury them and they rot in the dark and you can't help but smell them. You did right coming back with this." He slid the binder to me. "Make copies. Give one to Marjorie. Give one to a lawyer if you have to, but be careful who you tell." Word got out despite our small circles. A blogger with a taste for haunted places published a click-hungry piece, and before dawn the thread on a regional forum filled with rumors, old memories, and the kind of angry, disbelieving comments that only appear when someone pokes a bruise in public. People called me reckless, opportunistic, delusional. Others, with the slow heat of grief, wrote private messages about lost siblings and family secrets. One woman sent me an email at midnight with a single line. Asterisk, my brother never came back from there. Thank you. Asterisk. I didn't sleep because of the emails, because of the names I'd read in the ledger, because the small hands that had gripped mine in the dark kept replaying over and over like a makeshift lullaby. I felt responsible, to the children, to Tom, to the invisible shame that anchored the park. I felt ridiculous, too. All the evidence in the world sometimes feels like sand when you try to hold it up to someone else. We met at the library after hours. Marjorie lit a lamp that smelled faintly of lemon oil and placed the binder under it. She handled the pages like they were living things, smoothing a corner with the same care she used to turn brittle book spines. "This was covered up," she said without pretense. "Someone folded it quietly into a pile of files and left it to curl. Whoever did that was good at making people unsee things. We made copies and I kept an original in my bag. The plan we made was simple and dangerous in all the right ways. We would go back with a small party, me, Tom, Marjorie, and a man Marjorie trusted, a local attorney named Ellis who had come with a camera and questions. We would bring ropes, lights, and a legal letter that would compel the city records office to give us whatever they still had. We would be visible and sensible. We would not, under any circumstances, go down any hatches alone. When we returned to the park that night, it felt smaller. The morning's long road had been absorbed into the day. At night, the place shrank into a frame the way a picture does when you look too closely. The bareness of the gates somehow made the park feel hungrier. We parked in a different place and entered through the maintenance fence, a spot that let us move in without tromping over the main midway. A careful approach, the sort of planning that feels like armor. Ellis carried a flashlight like a bishop carries scripture. Marjorie had a pack of first aid supplies and one of those old-fashioned metal thermoses that seemed to belong to another era. Tom walked with a steadiness that made my shoulders relax a degree I didn't know I needed. He knew the layout better than any map could tell us. He pointed out the creak of a board that indicated a rotten joist, the way vines always hide places where water pools, the place where a step will give if you shift your weight. I led them to the ticket booth and showed them the first photo, the Polaroid of the small beds and tiny shoes. They listened and Ellis took notes, the mechanical, efficient kind that has no time for ghosts but plenty of time for evidence. He thumbed through the copies of the ledger with a careful frown. "We'll get you on the record," he said. "We'll file for historical records related to the fairgrounds. If there's a discrepancy, the city owes a duty to look." His optimism sounded like someone trying on armor that didn't quite fit. As we moved through the midway, something strange happened. The park responded. It is almost foolish to put it as plainly as motion and reply, but the lights around us, old bulbs wired long ago, flickered, as if an old circuit remembered a rhythm. The carousel chimed, tentative and off-key, and from the Ferris wheel a soft metallic groan rolled down. Tom put a hand on my shoulder. "They remember," he said softly. "Probably because you told them aloud what they'd been trying to forget." His tone was not accusation. It sounded like an explanation he'd rehearsed for years. The first major disagreement occurred behind the funhouse. Marjorie did not like the maintenance hatch. She said we should cut open records, not crawl into attics of rot. Ellis argued for a search warrant. Tom argued for the truth. I argued for the hatch. In the end, the hatch won because the hatch always wins when a place wants kept secrets. We pried the hatch and descended together. The ladder trembled under 4 adult weights. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then we stepped into the gallery beneath the coaster. The air was colder, finer, like a room behind a velvet curtain. The toys strung over the catwalk clacked softly as we moved by, and the small beds were exactly where I remembered them. Lined with threadbare quilts, polished tiny shoes on the floor. Ellis took out a camera and began to shoot, methodical, steady. He photographed the shoes, the Polaroid, the little carved names. The red eye of his flash blinked like a heart. For a while the place was almost clinical, evidence being recorded the way a doctor lists symptoms. Then the children came. At first they were nothing more than pressure, an increase in warmth, an almost imperceptible scent of sugar. Then a collective inhale, and the ring of small hands reached out. They brushed at Tom's sleeve, ran fingers along Marjorie's hair like a child curious about a new texture. Marjorie did not recoil. She laughed, a small, strangled sound, and when she said, "Aren't you sweet?" it was as if she were greeting a cousin. Tom, however, would not be coaxed. He looked away and picked up a shoe by its laces. "We can't make bargains to cover up what was done," he said. His voice had an edge that cut through the soft chorus. "If this place was covered up, we have to tell people why. We can't keep pretending they're just memories." He swallowed. "They're children." The words felt like a match in a dry room. One of the children, clearer than the others, an outline of a boy with hair like a wet shadow, moved toward Ellis and reached for the camera. The boy's face was upturned and earnest, like a child asking permission to press a button. Ellis smiled and bent. His professional curiosity softened for a moment by the intimacy of the scene. He let the boy touch the lens, and as he did, the flash popped. The flash did not capture only the boy. It captured a smear, a shape in the image that looked like a handprint pressed against glass. On the back of the image, Ellis later told me, the film had a darkened streak that no technician could explain. When Ellis showed us the first prints later, oddly pale from the camera's processing, Tom's face went slack. He whispered the names as if trying them on. We found a note tucked under a mattress. Handwritten, shaky. Asterisk, we tried to keep them warm. They never left. Asterisk, it was both confession and plea. That night, when we climbed out, the park's mood had changed. It felt less like an accused thing and more like a creature relieved to be named. The wind seemed to unbind itself from the trees. The laughter, when it came, was softer, less manic. Felt like gratitude. We left the maintenance hatch with more than proof. We had witnesses. We had recordings. We had an attorney who believed for the sake of paperwork and a librarian who believed for the sake of stories. We were going to make noise, and making noise felt for the first time like the right thing to do. But we did not account for shame. The next morning, the binder we had copied, the one I'd left in my car's passenger seat, was gone. My glove compartment had been rifled through. The Polaroid I kept taped to my notebook had been replaced with a single line of text written carefully on a scrap of paper. Some doors should stay closed. The message was not a threat so much as a promise. It let you know that even if you tried to be noble, there were hands that would not let you open certain things. I didn't go back to the park for 3 days. Not because I didn't want to, but because the message in my car worked its way into my bones. Some doors should stay closed. I'd read it over and over, wondering who had slipped it in, how they had gotten that close to me without being seen, and whether the warning was from the living or the dead. Ellis filed the petition for the records like he said he would. Within hours, the city clerk's office denied it. Asterisk, sensitive material. No further comment. Asterisk, that was the phrase. It sounded like a sealed coffin. Marjorie called me the night after the denial. "They're scared," she said. "You don't seal files for this long unless you're protecting someone. Or something." Her voice was steady, but I could tell she hadn't slept either. Tom, on the other hand, seemed more alive than I'd ever seen him. He came to my apartment with a paper sack of diner food and a conviction burning in his eyes. "We have to go back," he said, unwrapping a burger like it was fuel for war. "We go back, we dig deeper, and we find what they didn't want us to see. If they wanted us quiet, they wouldn't have left you that note. That's just their way of saying we're close." The problem was I agreed, so we planned another trip. This time, we didn't just bring cameras and flashlights. Ellis brought a body cam he'd borrowed from a friend in law enforcement. Marjorie brought a box of archival sleeves and gloves, determined to preserve any paper intact. Tom brought rope, bolt cutters, and something else tucked into his jacket that I didn't ask about. I brought my recorder, fresh batteries, and a growing sense that the children in the park were waiting for me. We entered under a heavy sky, clouds stacked so low it felt like they were pressing down on us. The gate creaked in recognition. The air had that same sticky sweetness. Sugar turned sour, and I swear it wrapped around us like a welcome. This time, the park did not wait for us to reach the heart of it. The moment we stepped inside, the carousel lit up. The bulbs glowed faintly yellow, flickering in unison, and the warped calliope music groaned to life. The horses, chipped and hollow-eyed, began to move in a slow circle. Marjorie gasped. Ellis cursed under his breath, and Tom whispered, "They know!" The voices started almost immediately. Children, dozens of them, overlapping, whispering our names, mispronouncing them, giggling between syllables. Alex, Marjorie, Tommy, Ellis. The sound came from all directions, carried on the still air, like we were surrounded by a playground with no source. Ellis's body cam captured it all. The lights, the music, the voices. He kept muttering, "This is admissible. This is evidence. No one can deny this now." But even as he said it, his hands shook so badly the lens tilted sideways. We pushed deeper, past the midway, to a section none of us had explored yet. The game booths, rows of rotted stalls with sagging awnings lined the cracked pavement. Rusted prizes dangled on hooks. Deflated balloons, mangled teddy bears, plastic trinkets coated in grime. And then we saw it. At the very end of the row, one stall stood almost untouched. Its paint brighter, its counter clean of dust. Above it, a sign hung at a perfect angle. Prize every time. But what made us stop wasn't the sign. It was the stuffed animals lined neatly on the shelves, new, pristine, their fur unsoiled by time. Bears with glassy eyes, rabbits with stiff ears, Dolls with red-stitched mouths smiling too wide. They looked like they had been placed there yesterday. Tom whispered, "That's not possible." I lifted my recorder. "Describe what you see," I told the group, more to keep my own panic from boiling over than anything else. Marjorie's voice was thin. "They're waiting. The toys. They look like they're waiting." That was when one of the dolls blinked. It wasn't a trick of light. Its stitched mouth quivered, and its glassy eyes snapped shut, then open again, staring straight at me. Ellis swore and dropped the camera. Marjorie stumbled back. Tom stepped forward like he wanted to smash it. But before he could, every stuffed animal on the shelf turned its head in unison, following me. And then, from behind the counter, a hand rose. Small, pale, with fingernails rimmed in dirt. It gripped the wood, and slowly, a child's head lifted into view. Hollow eyes, hair matted, but unmistakably a child. His lips moved, cracked and dry, and a sound scraped out. "Do you want to play?" The toys all grinned wider. The carousel music swelled. And somewhere behind us, the laughter turned sharp, almost mocking. My legs wanted to run. My heart wanted to stop. But my voice, my cursed, curious voice, whispered back, "Yes." The boy's head tilted when I said yes, as if I'd just passed a test he'd been waiting to give. His cracked lips stretched into something too wide to be called a smile. The toys behind him twitched, their heads jerking unnaturally, strings of fur and fabric pulling tight like tendons. Tom hissed, "Alex, what the hell are you doing?" But I couldn't stop. The child climbed fully into view, swinging one thin leg over the counter. He couldn't have been more than 7, but his skin was gray, stretched thin, and his eyes, those hollow pits, seemed to drink the light. He carried a small wooden box in his hands. He placed it gently on the counter and slid it toward me. "This is yours now," he whispered. His voice wasn't a child's anymore. It was layered, like a dozen voices speaking through the same throat. I didn't want to touch it. Every instinct screamed at me not to, but my hand reached out anyway. My fingers brushed the wood, and the temperature dropped instantly. Inside my ears, a rush of whispers bloomed. Pleading, angry, mournful, desperate. Marjorie's hand clamped onto my wrist. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "Alex, don't take it." But it was too late. The moment my hand closed over the box, the carousel screeched to a halt. The music warped into silence, and the park seemed to exhale a long, rattling breath. The boy's form flickered, glitching like a broken projection. Then he dissolved, crumbling into dust that vanished before it hit the ground. The box in my hands vibrated. It was small, no bigger than a lunch pail with a rusted clasp. A symbol was carved into the lid. An old carnival mask, half smiling, half crying. Ellis was muttering, recording everything in a frantic voice, trying to ground himself in procedure. Subject has received object from apparition. Object exhibits physical properties. Cold to touch, possible artifact, possible anchor. His words broke off into a grunt as the toys behind the counter began to move on their own. One by one, they stepped off the shelves. Not fell. Stepped. Their fabric legs bending, their button eyes flashing with a dull red glow. They began to march toward us in jerky, puppet-like movements. Tom pulled the thing out of his jacket then, an old revolver. The sight of it in the dim light jolted me. "Back!" he shouted, his voice hard and raw. "Stay back!" The toys didn't stop. The first one, a teddy bear with one missing ear, leapt at him. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space, stuffing exploding into the air like ash. But even without its head, the bear crawled forward, its arms reaching. Marjorie screamed. Ellis dropped his flashlight, and in the chaos the beam swung wildly, catching glimpses of the other toys advancing. Rabbits dragging broken legs, dolls grinning, a plastic clown clutching a rusted knife from one of the booths. "Run!" I shouted. My voice cracked, but it was enough. We bolted, shoving past the game stalls, the sound of tiny feet and dragging limbs chasing us. The box throbbed in my hands, almost alive, almost breathing. We burst into the open midway, gasping, the rides looming around us like watching giants. The carousel was dead now, its horses frozen mid-gallop. The Ferris wheel creaked once and then stilled. The silence was suffocating. Tom grabbed my arm. "Drop it," he yelled. "Whatever that thing is, drop it." But I couldn't. My fingers wouldn't let go. They clenched tighter no matter how hard I tried. The whispers inside the box grew louder, and among them, one phrase repeated over and over: "Bring us home, bring us home, bring us home." Asterisk. And then the laughter returned. Not faint this time, not distant, but close, all around us. Children's laughter, shrill and echoing, rising into a chorus that made my blood run cold. From the shadows of the roller coaster tracks, from the mouths of the funhouse mirrors, from the broken seats of the Ferris wheel, they came. Dozens of small shapes, flickering in and out of sight. Children, or what was left of them. They weren't hiding anymore. They were coming for us. The first thing I understood in that moment was that we were outnumbered. The small shapes pooled around us like smoke made solid, children's silhouettes, hands reaching, faces that blurred when I tried to hold them steady. The box in my hands pulsed against my palm, warm now, like a heartbeat trying to sync with mine. Tom shoved us toward the service gate. "Get to the car," he barked. And for a breath we moved as if we could outpace what had been stitched into the ground. The toys at our heels thumped and flailed. One rabbit snagged at Ellis's pant leg and tore a long strip of fabric. The revolver clicked as Tom tried to fire again, then jammed. He swore and shoved us faster. We made it to the lot and to my car. The engine turned over like a prayer. The park's outline receded in my mirrors. Iron teeth, ragged banners, a Ferris wheel that looked like a spine. But the laughter did not fade. It surrounded the car, threaded through vents, lodged in my teeth. Ellis got in the back with the camera, babbling legalities and logistics in a way that sounded logical but small. Marjorie sat in the passenger seat, her knuckles white around the thermos. Tom climbed in on my side with more care than I deserved and slammed the door. He stared at me for a long, thin second. "Drop it," he said quietly. "Now." I looked down. My hand had clenched without permission. The box lay on my lap, its carved mask watching me like a judge. The whispers had become a chorus. Hunger, plea, insistence. I could hear names threaded between the murmurs, the ledger's ink-forming syllables. Asterisk Daniel, Rosie, Tommy. Asterisk the same names that had been carved into metal and written on the soles of shoes. "No," I said, and I surprised myself with the force in my voice. "No, they..." My throat closed. How do you tell a man who carries a gun that the hand of a dead child feels warm and small and familiar? How do you say you remember a footstep that matches the one that used to be a heartbeat? Tom reached over and caught my wrist gently, then forced his hand toward the box. "We can't be its keeper," he said. "It will take you if you let it. It will sink right in." And for once I listened to Tom. He took the box. The metal seemed to drink light from the car's interior. He held it like something too hot and too hotly holy to touch for long. For a second nothing happened. Then the children's chorus shifted, expectation, then something like disappointment. The box thrummed in Tom's hands and the mask on the lid moved, just a fraction, as if breathing. "Drive," Tom said, and his voice was not the diner man now. It had become the voice of someone who had seen too much and chosen to act. He opened the glove compartment, fished out a coil of rope, and tied the box to the emergency brake lever with an absurd, stubborn precision. The car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. We drove like that into the pale gray of morning. We didn't speak much. The city looked ordinary. Strip malls with new signs, a dog walker pushing a stroller, the distant knot of the interstate. But beneath that surface, the box weighed the car down like a secret. Every time the laughter rose, it sounded less like an external thing and more like a stain seeping through fabric. We went first to Marjorie's. She had a spare room in the library that smelled of books and lemon oil. She wrapped the binder in archival sleeves and photocopied the Polaroid again and again until the machine heated and clanked and complained. We recorded the audio files and backed them to an external drive. Ellis, pragmatic and wired for the system, insisted we make duplicates and store them in separate places. "Evidence is only as good as your chain of custody," he said, and then, with a small, private shudder, he added, "And we will need lawyers if anyone tries to bury this." We built a plan that looked like hope on paper. We would go public. We would gather statements. We would press for hearings. We would make the city open the files. We would drag the story out of its sewers and into light. The city, as it turned out, had more defenders than we expected. A week after the park's name hit a regional news site, two things happened. First, an attorney from the city called Polite Anodyne and asked us to consider the implications of publicizing unverified claims. Second, my apartment was broken into in a way that left a message rather than missing things. The Polaroid I had taped to my notebook had been peeled off and replaced with a scrap of paper. Sometimes mercy is silence. The handwriting was elegant, the message precise. We doubled down. We held a press briefing in the library auditorium. Marjorie spoke first, steady, crystalline, and she read excerpts from the ledger aloud. Ellis presented photos with the same clinical detachment he'd had in the maintenance room. I played the audio, the warped music, the childlike whispering, the creak of the roller coaster's cart. All of it filled the silent auditorium like ghosts being invited in. A few reporters laughed nervously. A few took notes. One cameraman filmed the cassette player's red light as if it were a pulse. For 2 days, the story spread like a stain. Offices called. A local television producer asked for a sit-down. Anonymous voices lit message boards. Then the third day, silence. The station scrubbed the segment. The paper backtracked. The city insisted it had no records to release. Public interest cooled like a fire that had been starved of wood because someone had quietly, efficiently taken the woodpile away. We were being smothered by institutions that had whole languages for doing that work: legalese, redaction, classified files. "It's not just a cover-up," Ellis said one night with his forehead on his hands. "It's systemic. Someone, something, decided the cost of truth was too high. But the children did not care for bureaucracy. They wanted to be named and remembered. They wanted the warmth of a human voice to break the thin shell that held them in place." Weeks passed in a blur of attempts. Lawyers, petitions, a small protest that fizzled under pressure. Anonymous threats sent to our phones. A car that followed Tom home and then vanished at the last turn. I learned the smell of worry, hot and metallic, and I learned to sleep in short knives of time. What I did not learn was how to stop answering when the little voices called. On one late night, when the city's streetlights made the sidewalks look like pale bone, I found myself back in front of a small brick church 2 blocks from my apartment. Someone had left a single shoe on the church steps, clean and polished, and beside it, a scrap of ribbon. The shoe had the name Rosie scratched into the sole. I picked up the shoe and for a moment felt the tug of a small hand in my palm. I sat on the steps and opened the binder again. The names pressed like a charge. The ledger's scarred words, asterisk do not speak of containment asterisk, had become a vow to me, not a command. If no one else would speak, then I would be the one to carry it. If silence were an act of mercy, it was a merciless one. In the months that followed, I pieced together what I could. A group of investors had built the park in the 60s, and in the 70s various contractors and owners changed hands quickly when lawsuits and debts piled up. The maintenance cut corners. The city's oversight was tangled in politics and profit. The children's accident had been both an engineering failure and a moral failure, an industrial wound sewn up in paper and secrecy. We never got the full record. Requests were stonewalled, files redacted, names blacked out. But the ledger, film testimonies, and eyewitness accounts were enough to force a hearing. Small and local, full of legal niceties and a television camera crew that would not run the footage without corporate approval. The park's land was sold to developers who promised condos, a greenway, a new beginning. The bulldozers came with polite logos and an environmental impact team. One morning, a month after the hearing, I sat in a small crowd and watched the first scrape of metal take the Ferris wheel down. They tore the park to the ground. They hauled rust and wood away in dump trucks. They poured concrete where the maintenance hatch had been. They planted trees along the new paths. The developers held a ribbon cutting, smiling for photos. The forgiveness of urban planning is efficient that way. But that night, after the clatter of chainsaws and the smell of diesel had settled to something vague and airbrushed, I went back. The site was a clean, fenced lot. A security guard in a company vest nodded at me, bored and professional. I showed him my badge from the hearing and walked the perimeter. The ground under the cleared earth felt colder, thinner, like a thin cloth over a gap. I knelt and pressed my hand to it. For a moment, nothing. Then the air lifted with the faintest, unmistakable sound. A string of laughter, tucking itself into the roots of a sapling like a secret. I left the lot and walked home. In my coat pocket, the Polaroid that had been taped to my chest had disappeared. Vanished sometime between the hearing and the demolition, and in its place was a single ribbon, faded and tied in a clumsy bow. The ribbon smelled like lilac and metal. I understood then that you can bulldoze structures and you can file reports, but you cannot always move the people who remember being loved into daylight. Some things live in the seams of the world. Some things remember. Years have passed since then, and life keeps its ordinary shape. I moved apartments twice. I changed jobs. Tom's name appears in diner gossip once in a while. He stayed local, went quiet, worked with his hands and with his heart. Marjorie retired with a small ceremony in the library and left me a box of clippings she'd compiled in a tidy manila file. Ellis, practical, legal, kept chasing paperwork until it became a new life. We did what we could. The park is condos now, green benches and a playground with synthetic grass. Children play there in daylight, their laughter bright and unafraid. On warm nights when the wind is right, though, when the river air carries the scent of old things and the city exhales low and long, I sometimes hear a second sound layered beneath the present. The ghost of a calliope, the ghost of a cart rolling on a track that used to be. I hear a pattern of laughter folded into the city's own noise. I still have the recorder. I still have the binder. Sometimes, when the city is quiet and my apartment lamp burns low, I play the tape. The voices are softer now. They're patient. They say names like offerings. They don't sound like accusations. They sound like children waiting for someone to notice. If you're listening to this, if any of this reaches you, remember them. Name them. Tell what you can. Push at the seams where something hides. Because silence is an act, not a cure. And if you ever find yourself hungry for a story, for something that crawled out of the dark and asked to be remembered, be careful what doors you open. Some of them will take you in like a hand, and some of them will give you things to carry that you cannot set down without letting children go. Sometimes at night, when the city hums and the streetlights smear into long fingers, I feel the tug of a small, cold hand in my own. It's never strong enough to pull me back. It is, instead, a reminder that I promised to speak. I promised to tell. So this is what I tell. Of rides that remember motion, of laughter that learns to wait, of a ledger that tried to bury names and failed because people like us kept looking, because stories once seen are hard to forget.